Hi and welcome to my channel. I'm Simon and today I am back to tell you all about some honourable mentions of 2022. Some of the books that I either feel I didn't talk enough about this year that I really enjoyed, which I think has been quite a big thing for me, and I need to look at that next year, but also just some books that aren't quite going to make it into my favourites. I used to hate the term honourable mentions because I always think it's a little bit like you just weren't quite good enough to get into the top, but actually I'm using this as a way to chat about 15 books that I would like you all to give a whirl, or, well, a couple of them aren't exactly books, but it'll make sense. Well, no, only one of them isn't a book, actually. Let's get that sorted. Anyway, I've sort of done them into categories, kind of, but I thought, yeah, I would just give this one a whirl. So they're in no particular order, other than the fact that, like, I've kind of grouped them because I'm finding it tricky enough to order my top 12 plus 15 books for next Sunday when it's the 1st of January 2023. I mean, imagine. But I'm going to try much harder with those. It's interesting, there's a definite top like 7, and then the others could be interchangeable any day. Anyway, I'm giving too much away. Well, no, I'm not actually, I'm just teasing. Just teasing. So, starting at the beginning, it's a very good place to start. The short story advent calendar 2022 has been one of my absolute reading joys recently. I have really struggled with reading since sort of November, and this, to open one of these every single day and discover a new short story and discover quite a few new to me authors that I really want to go and read more books by, and that's a video that I think I'm going to do probably for Patreon, because this made me buy books. Sorry, Oscar was in here and he knocked the camera over because he was loving it too much. So that sounds wrong, basically nudging it a lot, and obviously it fell. Anyway, where was I talking about? The short story advent calendar 2022. Yeah, this was brilliant because, like I said, each day I was just really excited to head to a short story. It was made sure that I was still reading when I've been going through quite a big slump, but also it's got me really excited both for some books that I bought because of this collection, because I found authors whose writing I loved so much I wanted to buy some of their books, but also I discovered that some of the authors in these short stories were already on my shelves and I hadn't got to them yet, and so it's just brought me so much joy. I didn't do it last year, but I'm definitely going to do it, I think, every year that it keeps going, because I do think it's a real treat, both just in the lead up to the day that we're not mentioning today, even though it will be today as this goes live, but also just a really good way of introducing me to loads of different authors. And it's odd because I don't normally like an anthology, and this technically is that. So yeah, this was absolutely brilliant for that. Then a book that I haven't finished yet, I'm almost there, because it's a book that runs throughout the whole year, and it is Clemency Burton Hill's Year of Wonder, which is classical music for every day, and every single day you get introduced to a piece of classical music, told a little bit about it by Clemency in this really, like, you know, she knows her stuff, but it's not patronising, it's not academic, it's just her reaction to it, and then you go and have your reaction to it when you go and listen to it. And I found this an absolute joy. I've bought another Year of Wonder, which I'm going to start next year, but I think I'm going to do this one again, and that way I'm going to be what's the word? I'm going to be oh my lord, what is it when you see somebody again? That, with the music that I've heard already and getting to meet new pieces. So I think that's going to be really exciting. And yeah, I would heartily recommend, if you've not given this a go, giving it a go. I know I wanged on about it a lot at the beginning of the year and then haven't done since so much, but this has just been an utter joy. And like, whilst I'm nowhere near knowing classical music like I want to, I have discovered so many new to me classical pieces of music, but also, excitingly, I will say Corelli is my new favourite classical composer ever. I really want to go and see a Corelli concerto next year if I can. But what's also great is that it's one of those experiences where, you know, if you know classical music, well, you don't know what it's called, but then as you go through this, you're introduced to some of those very famous pieces as well as lesser known pieces, and that was really great too. So really loved that. Then onto some non-fiction, which actually is kind of the beginning of some work reading-ish. Or is this the only books? Yeah, it's the beginning. There's like 3 work books that I read this year that I wanted to mention. The first of which, did I say these were non-fiction, the first 2? They are. It's Minnie Driver's Managing Expectations, which is her memoir-ish, but it's really lots of different accounts of times in Minnie's past. And I just absolutely loved this. I was a little bit at first nervous and like, oh, is this going to be like, you know, your stereotypical celebrity tell-all memoir? But it's not like that at all. This is just, you really feel like you get to know Minnie as this all-round woman. Yes, there are elements of fame, but it's also about everything else. Well, not everything, because it's not like a tell-all, which I also really loved it for. But it's one of those books that's heartwarming, it's funny, it's just really, really lovely. And I would like to reread it. I think I want to listen to it. And I don't know if Minnie reads the audiobook, but I'm hoping so, because I did rush it a little bit for work, and because this was on the summer Sky Arts book club, and we had a short turnaround time to get to it, but I really, really, really enjoyed it. And I feel very similar to Raven Smith's Men, which I'm going to listen to next year, like I will be Minnie's book, and it's something that I've seen Lauren does, where if she really, really loves a book, she listens to it again at another point. And I think that's what I want to do with memoirs. Again, Raven was on the Sky Arts book club, and we had quite tight turnaround to read it, so I did sort of inhale it, but I think I would have anyway, like with Minnie's. The difference between Minnie's and Raven's is quite right. Like, Minnie's is very funny. This is like dirty, naughty funny, and it's quite salacious, and that is something that I really, really enjoyed about it. Raven's very funny, but also there's some really serious undertones in both of them. I might as well just hold them both up at the same time, because they're books that like have quite a lot in common, and a sort of non-fiction that I really like, because they're insightful into different people's walks of life, but also they're open and warm, and it does feel like you're having a chat with both of them. So yeah, I can't recommend these two enough. There isn't any non-fiction in my top 12 or 15 of 2022. I didn't read enough this year, but I really want to go back to more of it next year. But those two I just want to go back to and listen to again, because I enjoyed them so much. And then a book that I read for Sky Arts Book Club, but also read for the Women's Prize when me and Mum read the long list together, was Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason, which I know has really, really, really divided people. I really enjoyed this. It's about Martha, who is a woman who's going through a really difficult time in life. She's got an undiagnosed mental health issue going on. And I actually thought that was really clever, because I know that's been one of the criticisms of it, has been like, oh, we don't know what it is, and etc., etc. But I actually thought that was why it worked pretty well, and sort of it made it not the point, because I think if there had been a specific thing, that would have been like what the whole book was hooked on. And I didn't feel, and I felt because it wasn't hooked on one particular thing, it left it more open, but also other people might see different things in it. And I don't know, I thought that might be oddly helpful. And also it is fiction, and I think if it had been labelled, people would have been attacking it for, oh, you haven't got that right, you haven't got that right, you haven't got that right. And the fact that it was more evasive, but also mental health is evasive. It doesn't always tick boxes. It doesn't always do what everyone expects. And also, it doesn't always happen to likeable people. And I think that's where this is really, really powerful. So I would recommend this one very much indeed. Now, we're going to go back to the Women's Prize shortly, but before we do, my favourite of the Booker shortlist that I read this year, and again, it's a list that me and my mum read together, was the winner, The 7 Moons of Maali, Almeida. I very much enjoyed Glory. I didn't think it needed to be told through animals. I actually found that took me away from it sometimes. And I really liked the trees, but I got obsessed with the fact, like in a bad way, that the characters kept describing other characters as fat all the time. It just kind of bothered me, but I need to sort of sometimes park that, because maybe they were, but I think with the book, there needed to be more. You could have used different words or done it a bit differently. And I think when you're talking for me about a book, it needs to be like that. Anyway, I really, really love this. This is The 7 Moons of Maali, Almeida by Shehan, Karunatilaka, who I had the pleasure of interviewing for Sky Arts Book Club Extra, which I host every week over on the Sky Arts Book Club Facebook group, which is always linked down below. And I just thought this was so exciting. And I think it reminded me and there's books in my top books of the year that have magical realism in, but when it's done really well, I really enjoy it. And this surprised me in the fact that Maali has died. He's not quite sure what's happened to him. At first, he doesn't even realise he's dead. And then he's in this sort of office waiting to sort of find out what happens when you die. It's like the most bureaucratic, boring office ever. And then he's given 7 moons, in essence, to try and sort things out, but also to almost like make peace before he really moves on. And what it looks at is what's going on in Sri Lanka at the time of the book setting, and it gives a really interesting insight into basically the horrors of what were going on. And I have realised again this year that something that I really love is finding out about parts of different countries' history and how that's affected them. And I knew next to nothing about what was going on in Sri Lanka at that time, and this kind of, whilst and it's something that actually Shehan mentioned to me, it's not there to provide you with a historic overview because it is fiction and it does toy with facts a little bit, but it does give you an insight into it. And I think that's really powerful. And what I would like to do, which I said I was going to do this year and didn't in the end, is read much more around the world. I tend to focus on certain continents and I want to change that. So that's something that I'm going to do. I would at some point love to literally read around the world and try and read a book from every country, but I know that's almost setting myself a like impossible task to do in a year or 2 years. So I'm not going to, but I just want to make sure I'm reading much more worldly, if that's a term. But yeah, I thought this was brilliant. I loved so many different elements of it. And again, this is one that I would quite like to revisit at some point, because and I wonder if that's why a few of these books aren't, that end up on the longest and shortlist that I then read with mum or whatever as a way of like, because I just want to devour them. I wonder if that's why they don't always end up on my favourites, because there is that needing to get them done by a certain time, almost deadline reading, a little bit like work reading. So yeah, I need to have a little bit of a think about that for next year. Then 2 books from the Women's Prize long list that I thought were absolutely brilliant. There is one book, I just side-eyed it then, that from the Women's Prize long list that is on my favourites, but interestingly, I read it before it was long listed. So yeah, I don't know what that says. Well, I guess it backs up what I'm saying about sometimes with prize reading, because it's by a certain time with either the shortlist being announced or the winner being announced. It's that extra sort of pressure that you put on the book, and maybe read in a slightly different way, slightly more hurried way. I never ever speed read, and I want to make that very clear, but it kind of is a different way of reading. So I need to look at that, because I definitely want to do the Women's Prize long list again with mum next year. I don't know if we'll do the book, or we'll see. Anyway, Lisa Allen Agostini's The Bread the Devil Need, I just thought was utterly, utterly, utterly wonderful. And I probably, actually, I was going to say I wouldn't have got to this without Women's Prize. That's not true. I can't remember where I saw it recommended. It might be Book of Since over on Instagram. But I hunted this out in Bath last year, and then it stayed on my shelves until it was on the long list. And I just, this is all about Alethea, who is a woman who is in an abusive relationship, but she thinks nobody knows this. She thinks that, like, from the outside, everyone thinks that everything's perfect, but nobody really does. And then a woman is killed by her partner, and her friends start to say to her, you've got to sort your life out. And I think it's a shock to her that people know more than she thought she was giving away, but also, like, it could be really bad. And we follow her from there. There are a few coincidences in here, but I forgave all of that just because I love it. Like, suddenly she meets a brother who she's not seen for years and whatever. But I didn't kind of care, because I was so lost in Alethea's world. I loved her so much as a character. I loved how feisty and prickly, and yet how caring and warm, and she was just brilliantly complex. But also I thought it was a really insightful look into a abusive relationship from a woman who is perceived by many, not everyone close to her, but by many, as being completely in control. And yeah, I just think it's a really, really, really brilliant book. And if you've not read it, please, 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 please do, as I did. And this leads us into debuts, but we're still on the Women's Prize long list for now. The Paper Palace by Miranda Cowley Heller. And this is all about Elle, who, when we first meet her, has just had sex with her friend since childhood, while his wife and her husband and their families are all together in another part of the building. And from then we go backwards to learn more about her life, her childhood, the relationships that her mother had and how they may or may not have affected her. But also we go forwards as she kind of has these two men that she's sort of trying to work out which one she wants to be with. And I thought it was absolutely ace. I just devoured it. It was another book that I held, partly because I was aware it's for deadline, but genuinely also because it was completely gripping. Very much like this, actually. These books do talk to each other in an interesting way. So yeah, I just thought this was fantastic. I will definitely read anything Miranda Cowley Heller writes next. And yeah, brilliant, 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 brilliant. On to some other debuts then. And I'm going to start with my first book of the year, which I loved saying every time I mentioned it when I was vlogging about it, and that is Nightbitch by Rachel Yoder, which is all about a woman who has had a child, and ever since then she feels like she's sort of lost herself, but also she thinks she might be turning into a dog and into Nightbitch, and we follow it from there. The only bit that let this down for me was the ending, where it all just went a little bit arts and craft and bonkers, a little bit too midsummer for me without it being a horror, if that makes sense. I've watched the film Midsummer, and by then I was just like, this has just gone to an extreme that I don't really understand. And that did happen a little bit with this, but for the rest of it, for like 9/10 of it, I would say, I thought it was excellent. I loved the way it played with, was what was happening to her real or not? Were there other people who might be turning into dogs? How her husband was reacting to everything, how her child was, how she felt lost. So much in here that I thought was great, excuse me. And I think, well, I was going to say, I think I'll read everything she writes next. I know I will read everything that she writes next. Sorry, I've had a little bit of fizzy pop earlier and it's having an effect on me. Anyway, moving on. Yeah, Nightbitch. Absolute corker and a brilliant book to start the year with. I'm really, really, really glad I picked it up. I have decided my first book of 2023 already, but I'm doing it a little bit differently next year. Ooh, so there we go. And then, I don't know why I put that there, much better there. Then we have a book that I really, really loved. I took quite a while to read it, and in points I thought it was not overwritten. I don't know what the term I want to use is. It's very dense, that's it. It's very, very dense, but beautifully, beautifully written. But the density occasionally I would kind of not be scared of, but I'd be a bit like, I also was reading it at a time when I was ridiculously busy with work, and that doesn't always do a book a favour. But overall, I think it's utterly brilliant. And again, it's another book that maybe I feel like I would like to listen to on audio. And it's Lauren John Joseph's At Certain Points We Touch. And this is about, it's about a love that went really sour, and it's set on the leap day in a leap year, when our narrator is reminded of the death of a lover that they had and the toxicity of that relationship, but also the magnetism. And it looks at that. And I think what I really, really admire about what Lauren John Joseph has done with this book is the way that it looks at the intensity of relationships where there is that kind of toxic magnetismistic, I don't think that's a word, but you know what I mean? It's one of those where it really, really, it's a vivid, vivid, vivid book. But I think actually the density is also because the relationship is quite cloying. And so therefore you've got that. So in that essence, again, Lauren John Joseph has done like an amazing job, because you feel how cloying it is and you feel how dense and it kind of is, but also you feel how passionate it can be and how all of those things. And it's a really powerful book. And yeah, I would really, really, really recommend it. It's one that I found really difficult to talk about this year. And it's one, again, that I think I would have liked to have given it more breathing space, because when I was reading it, I felt I needed more breathing space. And at the same time, you really, 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 really want to read on. I was going to say Zig Zigar, but you do, you really, really, really want to read on. But at the same time, you want to put it down, because you're a little bit like, oh, this is quite intense. It's intense, it's vivid, it's claustrophobic, it's cloying, but it's brilliant and passionate. And I love the way it looks at gender and love and how we love people despite who they are, what their faults are. Sometimes love just is there, even when it's not great for us. So yeah, I thought that was great. A book that I read very recently, and so it's quite close to me, having read it, and therefore I want it to sort of settle in my brain a little bit more, is Other Names for Love by Taymour Soomro. And I thought this was brilliant. This is all about Fahad, who is a young man who's being sent to his father's farm, which he doesn't want to go and help. It's the family farm. And it's how we look at the complexities of the father-son relationship that they have, but also when he gets to the farm, he meets another young man and things happen. I don't want to spoil anything, but then what we do is we go over several sort of decades, we follow them and how the father-son relationship changes, how it is for both parties to how can I put it? There's a lot about what's unsaid. There's a lot about how at different periods in our lives we feel different ways about different things and different people, including our own families. It's about how you can't pick your family, but there are those links to them. There's just so much in what is not like a slight book, but a pretty slight book, but it's all like Taymour packs it in, and it's got this real propulsion. Even though it's not like a plot heavy book, you just keep wanting to read it. And I read this in one day, 2 sittings. Is that right? I read it on 2 different train journeys. Were they on the same day? Maybe they weren't. Or were they? Anyway, I read it in one day on trains, and I was completely hooked. I love the fact that it started on a train, and that felt really apt when I was reading on a train. It made me almost want to do a themed reading blog, but I'm trying to not do those because they add a little bit of pressure to the reading experience. Anyway, really, really brilliant. Whatever Taymour writes next, I will read. I thought it was fantastic. And a final debut before we go on to some short stories, and then a new to me author that I think I'm going to love everything by. And that final debut is Just by Looking at Him by Ryan O'Connell. Although I should say this is his debut fiction. He has got a non-fiction book. And this is all about Elliot, who is working in Hollywood. And again, everyone will see he has the dream life because he's got the dream job. He's got the dream perfect boyfriend, Gus. And it's not that way for him, partly because he is a man with a disability living in an ableist world, and particularly in the profession that he's in, and how Hollywood is all about perfection, and this book and Elliot are very much about imperfection. But perfection is a real theme in the book because Gus, his boyfriend, is perfect, even down to having the perfect penis, and yet something isn't right there and something isn't working, and actually he ends up paying for a male prostitute called River, who his boss has used, and that sort of sparks this whole unravelling. I loved the way that Ryan wrote about what it's like to have a disability in a very ableist society. I thought that was really powerful. Also, what it's like to have a disability within the queer community. I thought that was really, really, really powerful and impactful. And I think I'm hoping lots and lots of gay people have read this and will read this, because I think it's something that needs to be looked at, in the fact that within the LGBTQIA plus community, there are lots and lots of different fractions, and it can be really fractious between those fractions and not inclusive, which it should be, because it just should, frankly. But also I love the way that Ryan looks at River as this sex worker who from the outside is what you would, I suppose, stereotypically describe as a sex worker in terms of how he looks, etc. But there's so many more layers to him, almost like there's lots of different depths to a River. So yeah, I thought that was absolutely brilliant. It's also wickedly funny, really, really thought-provoking, and intelligent, open, but very kind of, it's not pointed, that's not the word that I want to use, but it's definitely like Ryan wants you to take something away from it, which I certainly did. And yeah, can't recommend that one enough. Also had the pleasure of doing an event with him. Should say, I have filmed something with Taymour Soomro for Sky Arts Book Club Extra, and we'll be reading some of the books he's recommended in a reading blog at some point next year, as I will actually be Minnie and Hanya Nagahara, and who else did I ask to give me book recommendations? Anyway, it's something that I want to do more next year, and I'm trying to think of other authors I'd like to ask. I'd really love to sit down with Leaf Schrack and get her to recommend me some books. But Anyway, I need to go something away then, but I won't. On to two short story collections that I really enjoyed. First of all, Revenge by Yoko, Ogawa. And these are actually short stories that interlink and sort of lead into each other in a lot of different ways. They've all got kind of revenge at their heart. They're a little bit supernatural. They're very dark, quite gritty. Just the sort of thing that I really, really enjoy, and reminded me that I need to read 1 more short stories and 2 more books in translation, which I can be very bad at. But yeah, I thought this was absolutely superb. And the same, I always feel like with short stories, because there's so much going on, I could either talk about them for 20 minutes or I can only really talk about them for 2 minutes or even 1 minute. Do you know what I mean? But another collection that I really, really loved was Shit Cassandra Saw, which is by Gwen E. Kirby. I was pretty confident this was going to be in my books of the year because it was in my books halfway through the year, my favourite books of the year so far, back in July. But I think with every short story collection, there's and I wonder if this is why not many make it into my top books of the year. Not every short story is absolutely amazing. And I think it's still the first story, which is all about Cassandra when she's seeing what the future of the world might be and is WTF, frankly. But that's the one that I remember the most. There are lots of other ones that I really, really enjoyed, but that's the one that I definitely remember the most. I do think, again, it's all about when I was reading this, and it was at a particularly bonkers busy time, and I'm hoping next year with more balance and just being a bit cleverer with making sure I have resting points and reading time, I will not have that sort of feeling about so many books next year. I would also like to ask you all because there's quite a few books here that I feel like I haven't talked about enough this year. I'm trying to work out how I could talk about specific books that aren't necessarily my favourites, but are really have meant a lot to me, or I don't know, how do I talk about them more? Because I did do videos on favourite books originally at the back of the year, but I mean, this year's just been a bit of a weird one for reading and videos and everything anyway, and I'm just thrilled you've all stuck around, frankly. Anyway, last but not least is a new to me author that I read this year that I think I'm going to love everything by, and that is Taylor Jenkins Reid, and this is Carrie Soto is Back, which I read to do an event with Taylor, who is joyful, and we almost missed going on stage because we were talking about Real Housewives. But I didn't know if I was going to love this because it's basically set over lots of tennis tournaments, and whilst I used to play tennis when I was younger, I used to be able to do an ace and everything. No word of a lie. Anyway, just going back to a memory there, one of my mum's friends who was really good at tennis, and me and her playing tennis, and I aced her, and she called me a piss pot. Anyway, that was just a memory that came back. But this is about Carrie Soto, who is back. She's been away. She had the title for the most wins in tennis. I've now forgotten the technical term. And there is a new young tennis player who is coming to threaten that title and that record. And so Carrie decides to come back and basically try to make sure she keeps it, and we follow over these tennis tournaments. I read this in a single day. I was so hooked. I don't quite know the alchemy that Taylor Jenkins Reid has in terms of making a book so addictive, especially about tennis, which I don't think should necessarily read very well. And because, you can watch some tennis games go on for bloody hours, and you can be there are those intense, brilliant moments, and there's some really boring minutes. But this I just found so well done. I also love that Carrie is a really flawed character. She's a bit of a bitch, and actually Taylor Jenkins Reid wanted to call this The Bitch Is Back. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. I loved the way it looked at fame and celebrity. I loved the way it looked at how the public, but also the paparazzi and the press treat successful women. And also, why should icons or idols within any field be perfect? Again, perfection, that's something that comes in a few of these books, and how it just isn't, well, it shouldn't be the case. People are flawed and complex, and that applies to every single person. Anyway, I literally devoured it. I think I read it mainly I was in a bath for hours, just constantly topping up with hot water. Possibly too much information for you all, or too much of a vision, in a good or bad way. Who knows? That could be a little gift for you today on this day of days. But yeah, I just thought it was absolutely ace, and I can't wait to read more Taylor Jenkins Reid. I'm really, really excited. I might actually read the others within this sort of universe and do a video on all of them. If that's something you'd like, let me know in the comments down below. Anyway, that was my honourable Mentions, 15 cracking reads if you can get your mitts on them. And I would recommend you do it, be it from your library, be it from an independent bookshop, whatever. Use any vouchers you may have got recently. I will be back with my favourites of the year next Sunday. Although I shouldn't overpromise you that because it might be later. Anyway, soon. And this week you will have... I'm not going to tell you what's coming this week, actually. I've got to remind myself not to overpromise because who knows what's going to happen in betwixtmas. But I hope you're having a fantastic Sunday, whatever you're up to. And if you're celebrating Christmas, have a very, very, very Merry Christmas. If you're not, or this time of year is really difficult for whatever reason, I'm just going to send you a big, bookish, beary hug just because. Why not? I will speak to you all very, very soon. Bye.